He watched the nanny through cameras, but what the millionaire's son did shocked everyone. Suspicious and controlling, a millionaire installs hidden cameras to spy on his son's nanny. But amid the footage, he discovers that the real plan was being carried out by the last person he expected. At just 8 years old, the boy moves everyone as he tries to change the nanny's fate and exposes his family's coldness. Belgravia, a noble neighborhood of London, looked like a perfect painting on that spring morning. Tree-lined streets, imposing mansions, and a silence that contrasted with the chaos of the metropolis. In one of these mansions lived the Montgomery family, a family that, from a distance, seemed as perfect as the neighborhood where they lived. Richard Montgomery, 45, CEO of one of the country's largest tech companies, adjusted his navy blue tie in front of the mirror while checking messages on his phone. His face, with its sharp features, rarely showed emotion. Controlled, methodical, and obsessed with results, he had transformed the small company inherited from his father into an empire. The price paid, however, was high: emotional distance from his family. "You won't believe what I found yesterday," said Angela, his wife, entering the bedroom with firm steps. At 40, Angela Montgomery maintained the beauty that had made her stand out in her modeling days before she gave up her career to dedicate herself to her family. Her brown eyes, once serene, now carried a constant restlessness. "I'm late for a meeting, Angela," Richard replied, without looking away from the mirror. "It's a receipt. Mrs. Cecilia bought a ticket to Miami without telling us." Angela crossed her arms, seeking a reaction from her husband. Mrs. Cecilia, the 32-year-old nanny, who had been caring for the couple's son for 3 years, was the frequent target of Angela's suspicions. A resident of the Bronx, an outer borough of New York City, Cecilia supported her younger sister Beatrice, who dreamed of studying international relations. Despite being discreet and dedicated, there was something about her presence that deeply bothered Angela. "She's entitled to days off, isn't she?" Richard finally looked at his wife impatiently. "It's not about days off. It's about trust. She's been here for 3 years, and we barely know anything about her life. Always so reserved, always with those looks at Michael." Michael, the couple's only son, was 8 years old and had a sensitivity that contrasted with his father's pragmatism and his mother's emotional instability. Observant, quiet, and extremely empathetic, the boy had developed a special bond with Mrs. Cecilia, who treated him with the affection and attention that were often lacking from his always busy parents. "What are you implying, Angela?" Richard asked, now clearly irritated. "I'm not implying anything. I just think we should be more careful. She spends more time with our son than we do." The sentence hung in the air like a silent accusation, hitting Richard where it hurt. He knew it was true. The endless meetings, the business trips, and the phone always in hand had created a chasm between him and his son. Angela, for her part, was divided between social events, sessions with her therapist, and anxiety attacks that emotionally distanced her from the boy. "What do you suggest?" "Cameras," Angela answered promptly, as if she already had the answer ready. "Discreet ones in strategic spots, just to be sure." Richard hesitated. The idea of spying on his own home seemed extreme, but it was easier to give in than to face another conflict with Angela. In recent years, their clashes had become increasingly frequent, always ending with Angela in tears and Richard immersed in work. "Speak to security, but be discreet." By the end of that same week, cameras were strategically installed throughout the house, in the living room, the kitchen, the bedroom hallway, and the study. Small, almost imperceptible, they recorded continuously and sent the footage directly to Richard's phone and Angela's computer. Meanwhile, in the kitchen, Mrs. Cecilia was preparing breakfast for Michael. There was a glimmer of sadness in her eyes, but her smile remained genuine as she served the boy. "Is your sister going to be able to go to university?" Michael asked, surprising Cecilia with the direct question. The nanny hesitated, looking around as if she feared being overheard. "She was accepted, Michael, but it's very expensive to study abroad, even with a partial scholarship. We're still short almost half the amount for the airfare and the first tuition payments." Michael nodded thoughtfully, chewing his toast with jam. "How much is missing?" "A lot of money, little one. Don't you worry about that." Cecilia stroked the boy's hair, trying to end the conversation. "Now finish your breakfast. You have swimming lessons today." In the living room, Angela watched the interaction on her phone, her eyes narrowed with suspicion. There was something about the relationship between Cecilia and Michael that bothered her deeply. Perhaps the natural affection that flowed between them, so different from the tense and formal relationship she had with her own son. That night, Richard arrived late as usual. The house was silent. He passed by his son's room, who was fast asleep, and went to his own room, where Angela was also already sleeping. Alone in his study, with a glass of whiskey in hand, he decided to check the camera recordings, more to appease Angela than out of any real suspicion. The footage showed the normal routine: Cecilia preparing meals, helping Michael with his homework, organizing his toys. In one of the videos, however, something caught Richard's attention. It was late at night, and Cecilia was in her room at the back of the house talking on the phone. There was no sound, only images, but it was clear that she was crying. In another video from the next day, he saw Michael quietly approaching Cecilia's bedroom door, as if he were spying. The boy stood there for a few minutes before running back to his room. What could be happening? Richard added more whiskey to his glass, feeling a growing unease. Could Angela be right in her suspicions, or was it something else entirely? The following weeks passed without any notable incidents. Richard immersed himself in a new company project, spending entire days away from home. Angela intensified her therapy sessions and social activities. Michael, apparently, continued his normal routine of school, extracurricular activities, and time with Mrs. Cecilia. It was during an important video conference that Richard received a notification from the living room camera. Annoyed by the interruption, he was about to ignore it when he saw the image preview. Michael handing something to Cecilia. Intrigued, he paused the meeting for a few minutes and opened the video. What he saw left him perplexed. His son, with trembling hands, was giving an envelope to the nanny. The boy's face was serious, determined, so different from his usual shy expression. Cecilia, in turn, looked confused as she received the envelope. Richard returned to the meeting, but his mind was elsewhere. What could be in that envelope? And why was his son, always so transparent, acting with such mystery? The boardroom on the 30th floor of the Park Avenue Tower felt suffocating to Richard that afternoon. While the executives discussed projections and goals for the next quarter, his mind kept returning to the video he had watched days earlier. The image of Michael handing the envelope to Cecilia haunted him. Richard? Any comments on the expansion into the southeast? The voice of Paul Miller, the CFO, brought him back to reality. Sorry, could you repeat the numbers? Richard asked, uncomfortable with the stares he was receiving. During the break, he isolated himself in his office and decided to review more camera footage. A quick search revealed more than he expected. Michael in his room, counting coins and writing down amounts in a small worn-out notebook. In another video, the boy carefully tucked away leftover lunch money in a small box hidden under his bed. There were also recordings of him selling drawings to his schoolmates during a birthday party held at their house. Richard felt a tightness in his chest. His son was saving money, but for what? The answer came in another recording from 3 weeks earlier. Cecilia in her room late at night talking on the phone. Thanks to the audio system Angela had insisted on installing, the conversation was audible. "No, B, don't cry," Cecilia said, visibly emotional. "We'll figure something out. This scholarship to the University of Edinburgh is your dream come true. We're short $6,000 to cover the airfare and the first semester, but I'll get it. I'll work overtime, ask for an advance." The conversation continued, revealing Cecilia's struggle to help her younger sister study international relations in Scotland. A unique opportunity that could be lost for lack of funds. The next video showed Michael standing behind the door, listening to everything. His small face reflected a mixture of sadness and determination. It was at that moment that the boy's plan was likely born. Overcome by a curiosity he had never felt before, Richard cancelled his afternoon meetings and continued his investigation. The recordings revealed a different Michael than the one he knew, methodical, persevering, driven by a compassion that surprised him. The boy had created a veritable project, with goals and strategies. In one of the most recent videos, Michael was on his tablet, researching the price of plane tickets to Edinburgh. In another, he was calculating how much he needed to save each day to reach the goal by the deadline for his sister's university registration. "My God," Richard murmured, running his hands over his face. It was then that he found the recording that explained everything. The moment Michael finally handed the envelope to Cecilia. 2 days earlier. "What is this, Michael?" the nanny asked, confused. "It's for your sister to go to college," the boy replied, his voice trembling but firm. "I saved money. There's $1,253. It's what I could manage." Cecilia's face transformed into pure surprise. "How? How did you know about that?" "Michael, I can't accept this. I heard you crying. No one should cry alone." The simplicity of the answer contrasted with the depth of the gesture. "You can accept it, Cece. I earned it myself." The recording showed Cecilia kneeling to be at the boy's eye level, tears streaming freely. "Michael, this is the most beautiful thing anyone has ever done for me. But it's your money, you saved it. I want to help, please." There was an urgency in the childish voice, an almost adult need to make a difference. Richard paused the video, unable to continue watching. He was flooded with contradictory emotions. Pride in his son, shame in himself, guilt for never having truly noticed who this little person living under his roof was. Michael, at 8 years old, demonstrated a generosity and empathy that he himself, with all his education and experience, did not possess. While he was building business empires, he had failed to notice the greatness growing in his own home. That night he returned home earlier. He found Angela on the phone organizing a charity event, ironically, a fundraiser for underprivileged children that would serve more as a social event than as real help. "Are you okay?" she asked, surprised by her husband's early return. "Where's Michael?" "In his room with Cecilia. They're doing his math homework." There was a hint of resentment in her voice. "Why?" Richard didn't answer. He went upstairs and stood at his son's bedroom door, observing the scene without being noticed. Michael focused on his exercises, while Cecilia patiently explained the addition problems. There was a harmony between them, a genuine connection that made Richard's chest ache. "Dad!" Michael finally noticed him, surprised. "You're home early today." "I finished my meeting sooner," Richard lied, entering the room. "How are the studies going?" "Michael is very good at math, Mr. Montgomery," Cecilia replied, standing up respectfully. "He has a knack for numbers. Especially for counting money, right?" The sentence slipped out before Richard could stop it, making Cecilia turn pale. "I'll go prepare dinner," she said quickly, leaving the room. Alone with his son, Richard sat on the edge of the bed, observing the small face that seemed so familiar and at the same time so unknown. "What did you mean, Dad?" Michael asked with surprising maturity. Richard took a deep breath. How could he explain to his son that he had violated his privacy, that he knew his secret? That, in a way, he felt diminished by his gesture. "Nothing important. I just came to see if you needed help." Another small act of cowardice added to so many others. "How was your day?" As his son told him about school and his friends, Richard noticed details that had previously gone unnoticed. The precise articulation of his words, the sensitivity with which he described his classmates, the intelligence that shone in his eyes. How had he never before noticed the extraordinary person his son was becoming? Later in his study, Richard made a decision. He accessed his bank account and made a transfer to Cecilia's account, $5,000. Enough to complete the amount needed for the nanny's sister, with some to spare. He prepared an envelope with a simple note. "To make your sister's dream come true." A friend. He didn't sign it. He wanted no recognition. For the first time in years, he was acting on something other than the cold calculation of gains and losses. The next morning, he got up earlier than usual and left the envelope on the table in Cecilia's room while everyone was still asleep. A simple gesture, but one that represented a profound shift in his perception of the world. Back in his bedroom, he found Angela awake, watching him curiously. "Where were you?" "I went to get some documents from the study," he lied, avoiding her gaze. Angela stared at him for a long moment, as if trying to decipher something hidden in his expression. "You've been acting strange lately, Richard." "I'm just tired," he replied automatically, taking refuge in the bathroom. As the shower water ran over his body, Richard thought about Michael and his small, silent revolution. His son had not only decided to help Cecilia, he had created a plan, taken concrete actions and persevered in his goal. All without seeking recognition, without fanfare, driven only by the genuine desire to alleviate someone's suffering. Was this what he himself had lost over the years? This ability to connect with another's pain, to act selflessly, to find meaning beyond material success. He came out of the shower determined to observe more, to better understand this little being who carried his last name, but seemed so different from him in essence. Perhaps, Richard thought with a sad smile, his son could teach his father how to be human again. The routine of the mansion in Belgravia was interrupted by a cry of joy coming from the back room. Richard, who was having coffee on the veranda while reviewing emails, looked up from his laptop, intrigued. Angela, arranging flowers in the living room, also paused, a look of bewilderment on her face. "What was that?" she asked, looking in the direction of the cry. Cecilia appeared at the kitchen door, her face flushed and her eyes teary. In her hands was the envelope Richard had left. "I'm sorry for the noise, Mrs. Montgomery," she said, visibly emotional. "I just received some wonderful news." "What news?" Angela asked, with a curiosity that masked her constant suspicion. Cecilia hesitated, as if weighing how much she should share. "My sister. She'll be able to study in Scotland. We received an anonymous donation that will supplement her scholarship." Angela frowned, clearly unsatisfied with the explanation. "A donation? From whom?" "We don't know, Mrs. Montgomery. The note just says a friend." Cecilia showed the envelope, keeping the money discreetly tucked away. "It must be someone from the church we attend, or maybe a charity that helps students." Richard watched the scene, feigning indifference, but his heart was pounding. There was something deeply satisfying in seeing the genuine joy on Cecilia's face, a joy he had unwittingly helped to provide. "Well, I'm happy for you," Angela said, without real enthusiasm. "But I need you to tidy up Michael's room before you take him to school. He's running late." When Cecilia left, Angela turned to her husband. "Don't you find it strange? An anonymous donation just like that out of the blue. Why would it be strange?" "There are generous people in the world," Richard replied, turning his gaze back to the laptop screen. $5,000 doesn't just fall from the sky, Richard. Someone is helping that girl, and I want to know who." Angela's suspicion was almost palpable. In recent years, as her insecurity grew, her jealousy and paranoia had intensified. Any interaction Richard had with other women, secretaries, colleagues, even Cecilia herself, was viewed with suspicion. The emotional isolation she imposed on herself made her increasingly controlling. "I'll take Michael to school today," Richard said suddenly, closing his laptop. "I have a meeting near his school." Angela stared at him, surprised. "You never take Michael to school." Maybe it's time to change that. In the car on the way to the private school in Greenwich, Richard watched his son in the rearview mirror. Michael was quiet, looking out the window with a thoughtful expression that seemed out of place for a child his age. "Are you okay, son?" Michael turned, seeming surprised by the question. "I am, Dad. You've been quiet lately." A small smile appeared on the boy's lips. "I'm thinking about a project." "What kind of project?" Richard's curiosity was genuine. "A project to help people," Michael replied, with a simplicity that hid the depth of his intentions. Like how Cecilia helped her sister. Richard felt a pang in his chest. So his son knew about the nanny's situation. "And how do you plan to do that?" "I'm still planning." Michael looked at his own hands, thoughtful. "But I think even kids can do important things, right?" "Without a doubt," Richard answered, his voice thick with an emotion he couldn't name. "Sometimes children see solutions that adults don't." He dropped his son off at school with a longer-than-usual hug. On his way to the office, he couldn't stop thinking about their conversation. Michael was developing a social conscience and an empathy that he himself had lost long ago, absorbed by the relentless competition of the corporate world. That same day during lunch, Richard did something he hadn't done in years. He turned down a business invitation and went home early. He wanted to be there when Michael got home from school, to watch him, to understand him better. He arrived in time to see his son coming through the gate, accompanied by Cecilia, who had picked him up from school as usual. The two were talking animatedly, and Michael was laughing at something the nanny was saying. There was a complicity between them that made Richard feel like a stranger in his own home. "Dad," Michael exclaimed, surprised to see him in the living room. "You're not at work?" "I decided to come back early today," Richard replied, smiling. I thought I'd help with your homework. The boy's face lit up. Really? I have a science project on endangered animals. Great, we can research it together. Cecilia watched the scene with a discreet smile. I'll go make you two a snack then. The next few hours were the most pleasant Richard had had in a long time. Sitting next to his son in the home library, researching endangered animals, learning alongside him, he felt connected in a way he had forgotten was possible. Michael was sharp, curious, and had a special sensitivity for environmental and social issues. He spoke about the importance of preserving species with a surprising eloquence for his age, and he linked animal extinction to broader issues of inequality and justice. Where does this interest of yours in helping others come from, Michael? Richard asked, genuinely curious. The boy reflected for a moment. I think I've always had it, Dad, but Cece taught me a lot too. Cecilia? Michael nodded. She's always helping others, even though she has little. When we go to the park, she buys a snack for a homeless man. And she sends money every month to her grandmother back in West Virginia. Richard felt a pang of shame. He had hired Cecilia 3 years ago, but had never bothered to really get to know her. To him, she was just the employee who looked after his son, not a person with her own history, dreams and values. She seems like a good person, he commented, feeling the inadequacy of his words. The best, Michael affirmed with conviction. Did you know that Bea, her sister, got the money she needed to study abroad? It was a miracle. Richard smiled, moved by his son's enthusiasm. Sometimes miracles happen to those who deserve them. That night, after Michael had gone to bed, Richard returned to his study and continued watching the camera recordings. He was no longer looking for proof of some imaginary betrayal. He wanted to better understand the dynamics of the house when he wasn't there. In one of the recordings, he saw Cecilia on a video call. From the camera's angle, he could see the face of the young woman on the screen, Beatrice, the nanny's sister, a young woman with features similar to Cecilia's, but with a more academic air. I still can't believe it, Cece, Beatrice said with tears in her eyes. $5,000. It's exactly what was missing, with some extra for the first few months. God is good, Bea, Cecilia replied, also emotional. Now you're going to achieve your dream. But who could have donated it? Are you sure it wasn't your boss? Cecilia shook her head. Mr. Montgomery barely notices I'm here, Bea. And Mrs. Montgomery, well, she wouldn't do something like that. It must have been someone from church or maybe that NGO you contacted. Whoever it was, I'm going to honor this opportunity. I'm going to study so hard, Cece, I'll graduate with honors. I know you will, my sister. You deserve this. The conversation continued, revealing the story of the two sisters who had lost their parents early and were fighting to build a better life. Cecilia had given up her own studies so that Beatrice could continue hers. And now that shared dream would finally come true. Richard turned off the computer, deeply touched. He thought of his own path, the son of a successful businessman, heir to an already established company, educated in the best schools. He had never really had to fight for anything, never known the anguish of not knowing if he could pay the bills at the end of the month. In the days that followed, a subtle change began to take place in Richard. He started coming home earlier, dedicating evenings and weekends to his family, observing his son with new eyes. He wondered more and more often how his obsession with work and financial success had distorted his priorities. Angela, for her part, watched this transformation with a mixture of confusion and suspicion. The husband who had always been predictably absent was now present, interested, emotionally connected. The change, though positive in essence, destabilized her. You're different, she commented one night as they were getting ready for bed. Richard, who was reading a children's book Michael had recommended, looked up. Different how? I can't explain it. More present, more human. There was a note of insecurity in her voice. Is it because of Michael? Partly, Richard admitted, closing the book. I realized I was missing precious moments of his life. Just because of him? Richard hesitated, choosing his words carefully. For us too, Angela. I think we've grown apart over the years. I got lost in work, you in your social activities. We created a life of appearances. Angela sat on the edge of the bed, suddenly vulnerable. I'm scared, Richard. Scared of what? Of not being enough. That one day you'll realize you deserve something more, someone more interesting, more— Stop it, Richard interrupted, moving closer to her. It's not about you being enough. It's about us being true to each other, to ourselves. He tried to hug her, but Angela pulled away, recomposing her mask of coldness. It's late. Let's go to sleep. That night, lying side by side but separated by an emotional abyss, Richard realized that the transformation beginning within him would not be easily shared with Angela. The walls they had both built over the years would not fall overnight. But for the first time in a long time, he felt hope. His son, with his natural empathy and generous heart, had awakened something in him that he thought was lost, the capacity to genuinely care for others, to act out of compassion, to seek a meaning that transcended material success. Richard's transformation did not go unnoticed at work. Rescheduled meetings, early departures, and a new policy of not taking calls during dinner raised eyebrows among executives accustomed to his obsessive dedication. "What's going on with you, Richard?" asked Maurice Vance, his partner and longtime friend, during lunch at the Greenwich Country Club. "First you turned down that trip to Shanghai, now you want to reduce your involvement in the expansion project." Richard watched the people around them, executives like himself, devouring expensive meals between calls and emails, a routine that until a few weeks ago had been his own without question. "I'm rethinking some priorities," he finally replied. "My son is growing up and I barely know him." Maurice frowned. "We all have children, Richard. That's what schools and nannies are for." The cruel simplicity of the statement hit Richard like a slap. It was exactly how he himself had thought until recently. Children as long-term projects, delegated to third parties while he built empires. "Maybe we're wrong," he said, more to himself than to his friend. When he arrived home that afternoon, he found an unusual scene. Angela rummaging through papers in his study, with an expression that mixed anger and confusion. "What are you doing?" he asked, surprised by the intrusion. Angela turned, holding a bank statement. Her bloodshot eyes showed she had been crying. "I should be asking you the same question, Richard. What is this?" She held out the paper. It was the statement for the $5,000 transfer to Cecilia's account, made weeks earlier. Richard's blood ran cold. He had been careless, had forgotten to delete the receipt. "I can explain." "Explain what?" "That you're having an affair with the nanny, that you're giving her money behind my back." "It's nothing like that, Angela." "Sit down, please." "I don't want to sit down. I want the truth." Angela's voice rose, trembling with emotion. "I always suspected her, always. And you said I was exaggerating, that it was my paranoia." Richard tried to approach her, but she backed away. "It's not what you're thinking. The money was to help her sister study abroad. She got a scholarship, but she needed to cover the rest." "And since when do you care about your employees' families? Since when do you make anonymous donations?" Angela's suspicion only grew. "You don't even donate to the charities I support." "It was for Michael," Richard finally revealed. "He was saving money to help Cecilia. I found out through the cameras. Our son, at 8 years old, saved over $1,000 selling drawings, saving his lunch money. I was so moved that I decided to complete the amount." The confession should have calmed Angela, but it had the opposite effect. "The cameras? You've been monitoring the cameras without showing me." Her voice went up an octave. "And you let our son be manipulated by that woman." "No one manipulated anyone, Angela. Michael heard Cecilia crying on the phone with her sister about the scholarship. It was his idea to help. It was a genuine, pure act. You're defending her?" Angela laughed, a bitter, humorless laugh. "That woman came into our house and turned us against each other. Don't you see what's happening?" The conversation was interrupted by the sound of the front door opening. Michael and Cecilia were returning from a school activity. Their cheerful voices echoed down the hall, a painful contrast to the tension in the study. "This is over," Angela said, with a coldness that made Richard shudder. "I'm going to deal with this right now." Before he could stop her, Angela left the study and went to the living room, where Michael was showing Cecilia something, a certificate apparently. "Michael, go to your room." "I need to speak with Cecilia," Angela ordered with a forced calm that barely disguised her fury. The boy, sensitive to the tension, looked confusedly at the nanny and then at his mother. "Did something happen, Mom?" "Now, Michael." The order came more firmly, making the boy retreat. Cecilia sensed the gravity of the situation. "Go on, Michael. It's okay. We'll talk about your certificate later." Reluctantly, the boy went upstairs, looking back with every step. Richard, watching from the study doorway, felt a knot in his stomach. The situation was about to explode, and he didn't know how to contain it. When Michael finally disappeared down the upper hallway, Angela turned to Cecilia, holding the bank statement. "What is this?" she asked, holding out the paper. $5,000 from my husband to your account." Cecilia's face turned pale. "Mrs. Montgomery, I don't want your explanations. I want you to pack your bags and get out of my house now." Angela's voice was icy, final. "You manipulated my son, seduced my husband, and had the audacity to accept money from him." "Angela, that's enough." Richard intervened, approaching them. "You're being unfair. Unfair." Angela turned to him, her eyes flashing with indignation. "You're defending her in front of me. In our house." Cecilia, who seemed to shrink with every word from Angela, finally gathered the courage to speak. "Mrs. Montgomery, I swear I didn't know the money was from Mr. Richard. It came as an anonymous donation to help my sister with college." "And you expect me to believe that? An anonymous donation that just so happened to come from my husband's account?" Angela laughed, a harsh, painful sound. "You have 1 hour to leave, and know that I will sue you for emotional distress, for manipulation, for—" "Enough!" Richard's voice echoed through the room, startling both women. Never in all their years of marriage had he raised his voice to Angela. "You're being irrational, Angela. This is all a product of your insecurity, your sick jealousy. How dare you?" Angela recoiled, shocked by her husband's reaction. "I dare because I can't stand this climate of suspicion you've created anymore. It was your idea to install the cameras. You're the one who turned our home into a prison of constant surveillance." Richard took a deep breath, trying to control his emotion. "And it was through those same cameras that I discovered what you can't see, that we have an extraordinary son, capable of a generosity that neither you nor I possess." At the top of the stairs, hidden, Michael heard everything, his eyes wide with fear and confusion. "Mr. Montgomery, please," Cecilia intervened, clearly uncomfortable. "I don't want to cause trouble. I can leave, find another job." "No, Cecilia, you've done nothing wrong." Richard turned to her, then to Angela. "The money was an anonymous donation, yes. I gave it because I was moved by Michael's actions. Our son, on his own, decided to help someone in need. He's better than both of us combined, Angela. Don't you see what's happening?" Angela shook her head, incredulous. "This woman is manipulating both of you. First Michael, now you." "The only manipulation here is your jealousy controlling your actions," Richard retorted. "Look at yourself, Angela. When was the last time you really listened to Michael, that you participated in his life, beyond choosing expensive schools and designer clothes?" The words hit Angela like a punch. She staggered, leaning against the wall. "How dare you judge me as a mother?" "I'm not judging. I'm begging you to see what you're doing to us, to Michael." "Mr. Montgomery," Cecilia tried again, tears streaming down her face. "I'll leave. I don't want to destroy your family." "No!" A childish cry echoed through the house. Michael ran down the stairs, his face wet with tears. "Cece can't leave. It was all my fault." The boy ran to the nanny, hugging her around the waist. "I was the one who gave her the money first, Mom. I saved coins, sold drawings at school. Dad only helped because I couldn't save it all myself." Angela stared at her son as if seeing him for the first time. You gave her money, why?" "Because her sister needed it," Michael answered with the devastating simplicity of children. "I heard her crying, saying her sister wouldn't be able to study abroad. No one should cry alone, Mom." The phrase, "no one should cry alone," hung in the room like a silent accusation. How many times had Michael cried alone, while his parents were too busy with their own lives to notice? "This is ridiculous," Angela muttered, but her voice lacked its earlier conviction. "A child doesn't just decide to give away money like that." "But I did," Michael insisted, firm despite his tears. "Cece always takes care of me, helps me with my homework, plays with me when you're busy." I wanted to pay her back. The ensuing silence was heavy, laden with painful truths that no one dared to fully admit. It was Cecilia who finally broke it. "I'll pack my things," she said, gently disentangling herself from Michael's embrace. "It's for the best for now." "No, Cece, please," Michael pleaded, clinging to her again. Shh, it's okay, little one. She knelt, meeting the boy's eyes. Sometimes adults need time to understand things. But remember what we talked about courage. Michael nodded, his lips trembling in an effort to hold back his sobs. That sometimes the greatest courage is doing the right thing, even when it's hard. Exactly, Cecilia smiled, a sad farewell smile. You're already braver than many adults I know. As Cecilia went upstairs to pack, a heavy silence settled over the room. Michael, standing between his parents, suddenly looked small and vulnerable. Are you happy now? Richard asked Angela, with a coldness he had never used before. You managed to destroy something beautiful because of your insecurity. Angela didn't answer. Her face, usually controlled in a mask of perfection, now displayed a confused mix of emotions, anger, shame, doubt. I'm taking Cecilia home, Richard declared, grabbing the car keys. And tomorrow I'm going to her house personally to clear everything up with her sister, to make sure she can still study. You're not going anywhere with her, Angela protested, but her voice had lost its former strength. Yes, I am, Angela. And when I get back, we need to have a serious talk about what happened here today, about the kind of example we're setting for our son. Michael, who had been watching everything in silence, finally spoke, his voice small but determined. Can I come with you, Dad? I want to say goodbye to Cece properly. Richard hesitated, looking at Angela. The situation was already tense enough without involving the boy further. Stay with your mother, son. I'll be back soon and we'll talk, okay? Michael nodded, though the disappointment was clear in his eyes. Richard went upstairs, while mother and son remained in the living room, an awkward silence between them. When Cecilia came down with her small suitcase, Michael ran to her for one last hug. I won't forget you, Cece. And I won't forget you, my little hero, she replied, kissing the top of his head. Angela watched the scene, a storm of conflicting emotions in her chest. Part of her wanted to pull her son from the nanny's arms, to reassert her territory. Another part, however, a part that had long been silenced, recognized the purity of the affection between them. Richard and Cecilia left, leaving Angela and Michael alone in the vastness of the house, which suddenly felt cold and empty. The boy looked at his mother, and something in his eyes, a mixture of disappointment and pity, hit her more deeply than any direct accusation. Why, Mom? He asked simply. And Angela, for the first time in a long time, didn't have a ready answer. She only felt the tears she had been holding back begin to stream freely down her face. Cecilia's apartment in the Bronx was small but cozy. 2 cramped bedrooms, a living room combined with the kitchen, simple and well-kept furniture. On the walls, family photos, Cecilia and Beatrice as children, their deceased parents, their grandmother in West Virginia. I'm sorry for the simplicity, she said, embarrassed, as Richard took in the surroundings. Don't apologize. It's a real home, and it was. There was warmth here. A genuine presence that was lacking in the Belgravia mansion, with its rooms impeccably decorated by professionals, but devoid of soul. Sitting at the kitchen table with simple coffee served in mismatched cups, Richard finally told her the whole truth, how he had discovered Michael's plan through the cameras, how moved he had been by his son's gesture, how he had decided to complete the amount anonymously. I never imagined it would cause so much trouble, he concluded, running his tired hands over his face. I want you to know that none of this is your fault, Cecilia. My marriage has been having problems for a long time. Cecilia stirred her spoon in her cup, thoughtful. You shouldn't be here, Mr. Montgomery. Mrs. Angela will become even more suspicious. I don't care about her suspicions anymore. Richard sighed, feeling the weight of years of conformity. I'm tired of living for appearances, of suppressing what I feel to maintain a superficial peace. A heavy silence settled between them, laden with unspoken words and painful realities. And what about Beatrice? Richard finally asked. Is she already in Scotland? Cecilia shook her head. Not yet. Her flight is scheduled for next month. She's finalizing the last of the paperwork. And now, with all this, I don't know. Silent tears began to stream down Cecilia's face. I might have to return the money, find another job quickly. No, Richard interrupted firmly. I won't allow your sister's dream to be destroyed because of this. The money was given, there are no strings attached. Cecilia looked at him, surprised by the determination in his voice. You've already done too much, Mr. Montgomery. I can't accept anything more. It's not for you, Cecilia. It's for Michael. Richard smiled, a sad smile. My son did something extraordinary, something that made me see how far I had strayed from what truly matters. I won't let that gesture be lost. On the way back home, Richard drove in silence, lost in thought. The city at night passed by the car window, lights, lives, stories intertwining. How many of those people lived like him, trapped in empty routines, distant from their own feelings? When he arrived home, he found Michael asleep in the living room, curled up in a blanket on the sofa. Angela was sitting in a nearby armchair watching her son sleep. "How is he?" Richard asked in a low voice. "He cried himself to sleep," she answered, without looking at her husband. "He keeps asking for Cecilia." Richard approached his son, adjusting the blanket over his small shoulders. The child's face, even in sleep, still held traces of sadness. "And you? How are you?" he asked Angela, sitting on the opposite sofa. She finally faced him, and Richard was surprised to see that she had been crying too. "Confused, furious, hurt. I know." "No, you don't," Angela's voice trembled. "You have no idea what it's like to feel like you're losing everything, that nothing you've built is real. First, our son prefers the nanny to me. Now you defend her, you choose her." "I didn't choose anyone, Angela. I just wanted to do the right thing." "The right thing?" She laughed, a bitter sound. "The right thing would have been to consult me before giving money to an employee. The right thing would have been to tell me what you discovered on the cameras. The right thing would have been for us to be a team, Richard." He sighed, acknowledging the truth in her words. "You're right. I should have shared everything with you from the beginning. But I was afraid of your reaction, of how you would interpret it all. And you were right, weren't you? I interpreted it in the worst possible way." Angela looked away, gazing at her sleeping son. "Maybe I've gone a little crazy." The admission, however timid, surprised Richard. In all their years of marriage, Angela had rarely acknowledged her mistakes or vulnerabilities. "We both lost our way at some point," he said softly. "We built a life based on appearances, on control, on distrust. And our son somehow managed to remain pure in the midst of it all." Angela nodded, silent tears streaming down again. "He's better than both of us combined." "Yes, he is." Richard felt a wave of pride mixed with sadness. "And he deserves parents worthy of his heart." They remained in silence for a long time, watching their son sleep, each lost in their own thoughts. The mansion, so imposing and cold, felt strangely small that night. "I can't go on like this," Angela said finally, her voice almost a whisper. "I need to think, to breathe." Richard knew what she meant before the words were even spoken. "I'm going to stay at my sister's for a while," she continued, avoiding his gaze. "I need to figure out who I am away from all this, away from us." He nodded, feeling a contradictory mix of relief and sadness. "And Michael? He stays with you. You two seem to understand each other better now." There was pain in her voice, but also a resigned acceptance. "And I think I need to find myself before I can be the mother he deserves." The next morning, Angela left with 2 suitcases and many contained tears. Michael, up early for school, watched his mother get into the taxi with a solemn expression that seemed out of place on his childish face. "Is she coming back?" he asked Richard as the taxi disappeared around the corner. "She will, son. She just needs some time to think. Like when I get a time out in my room to think about what I did." Richard smiled at the comparison. "Something like that, yes. But it's not a punishment. It's a time for her to get to know herself better." The days that followed brought a new routine to the Montgomery household. Richard rearranged his professional commitments, delegated responsibilities, and began working remotely whenever possible. Mornings now included breakfast with his son, conversations about the previous night's dreams, and planning the day. Cecilia's absence, however, was keenly felt. Michael asked about her daily, and Richard honestly told him that she was well, that her sister was preparing to study abroad. "Can we visit her?" Michael asked one morning while eating cereal. Richard hesitated. The idea hadn't occurred to him, but it made perfect sense. "I think she would like that." The following Saturday, father and son drove to the Bronx. Michael brought a drawing he had made especially for Cecilia, a colorful depiction of her. Beatrice and himself all holding hands. The surprise on Cecilia's face when she saw them at her door was genuine. "Mr. Montgomery." "Michael!" "Cece!" The boy threw himself into her arms with the impulsiveness of children, nearly knocking her over. "I hope we're not bothering you," Richard said, embarrassed. "Michael really wanted to see you, and I thought—" "Come in, please," Cecilia interrupted with an emotional smile. "I was just baking a cake. You can keep me company." The visit, initially planned to be brief, extended through the entire afternoon. Cecilia showed them photos of Beatrice, told stories of her childhood in West Virginia, and taught Michael how to make brownies. There was a lightness in the air, a welcoming simplicity that contrasted with the tension that dominated the Belgravia mansion, even on its best days. During a moment when Michael was distracted by one of Cecilia's old board games, Richard finally broached the subject that was on his mind. "I found another job for you," he said, lowering his voice. "A family in Kensington, trusted friends. Their son is Michael's age. The parents are decent people." Cecilia looked at him, surprised. "So you didn't have to go to the trouble, Mr. Montgomery. I'm already looking for work." "It's no trouble. It's the least I can do after everything." Richard hesitated, choosing his words. "Besides, I wanted to propose something else." "Something else? Come back to work for us." The words came out before he could think them through. "Not as a nanny. Michael is growing up. He needs his independence. But as the coordinator of a project I'm thinking of starting." Cecilia frowned, confused. "What kind of project?" "I'm not sure yet. Something inspired by what Michael did, helping students with no resources achieve their academic dreams." Richard smiled, feeling strangely light as he verbalized the idea that had been germinating in his mind. "I think my son showed me a purpose I had lost sight of long ago." The conversation was interrupted by Michael, who came running back with a notebook in his hands. "Look what I found in Cece's room, Dad. It's like my project." It was a simple notebook, where Cecilia had jotted down over the years the names of young people in her community who needed help to study, college prep courses, school supplies, transportation. Some names were marked with stars, indicating they had already received some form of help. "You do this by yourself?" Richard asked, flipping through the notebook with growing admiration. Cecilia blushed. "It's not much, really. I save what I can, ask for donations at church. Some got scholarships to community prep courses, others—" "It's amazing," Michael interrupted, his eyes shining with enthusiasm. "It's exactly what I wanted to do at school. Help people study." At that moment, something clicked in Richard's mind. An idea, a possibility, a path. He looked at his son, then at Cecilia, and saw the same spark of enthusiasm in both of them. "What if we expanded this?" he suggested, feeling an excitement he hadn't experienced in years. "With structure, with resources, we could help so many more people," Michael added, jumping with excitement. "We can start at my school, then expand to other schools, then the whole city." Cecilia watched the interaction between father and son with an emotional smile. There was something deeply moving about Richard's transformation, the cold, distant executive she had known giving way to a man who could get excited about the possibility of helping others. "What do you think, Cecilia?" Richard asked, bringing her back into the conversation. "Would you be willing to coordinate something like this? Your experience would be invaluable." The offer was tempting, but Cecilia hesitated. "And Mrs. Angela, when she comes back—" "If she comes back," Richard corrected, a note of sadness in his voice, "we'll have to deal with that. But I can't live as a hostage to fear and distrust anymore. Michael taught me that." The following week, the project began to take shape. Richard made a room available in one of his commercial offices in Midtown South, officially hired Cecilia as a social coordinator, and began the process of creating a foundation to fund scholarships. Michael, excited by the idea, mobilized his classmates at school. Initially, he faced resistance. Children from wealthy families rarely took an interest in social issues. But his persistence and enthusiasm were contagious. With the support of a few sympathetic teachers, he managed to organize a first event, an art fair where students would sell their work, and the money would go towards scholarships for young people from the outer boroughs. The school's headmistress, Dr. Eliza Monroe, initially skeptical, was ultimately charmed by Michael's maturity and commitment. "Your son is an extraordinary young man, Mr. Montgomery," she commented during a meeting to discuss the details of the fair. "In all my years as an educator, I have rarely seen such social awareness in someone so young." Richard smiled, a mix of pride and humility. The credit isn't mine, Dr. Monroe. In fact, I'm learning more from him than I ever taught him. The house in Belgravia, once a space of awkward silences and empty formalities, came to life. Richard and Michael started cooking together on weekends, reading the same books and talking about all sorts of subjects. A complicity that had never existed before blossomed between them. Angela, during this time, maintained minimal contact, occasional messages asking about their son, 1 or 2 brief phone calls. She was staying at her sister's house in Boston, and according to her, trying to find her own way. A month after her departure, Richard received an email from her that surprised him. She was in intensive therapy, 3 times a week, confronting childhood issues that had shaped her insecurity and need for control. "I don't know if our marriage can be saved," she wrote, "but I know I need to become a better person regardless." The unusual sincerity of the message moved Richard. He responded with equal frankness, sharing his own reflections on how he had grown emotionally distant over the years, how he had used work as a shield to avoid dealing with his own inadequacies as a husband and father. It was a more honest dialogue than any they had had during their marriage. Meanwhile, the social project, which Michael had named Little Steps, was growing. The school art fair was an unexpected success, raising nearly $20,000. With that amount, they were able to fund school supplies and transportation for 15 students from Cecilia's community. The news spread. Other private schools expressed interest in participating. Businessmen from Richard's circle, curious about his sudden change in priorities, began to ask about the project and offer support. Cecilia, for her part, blossomed in her new role. Her initial shyness gave way to a quiet confidence as she coordinated meetings, established selection criteria for scholars, and organized events. Her direct knowledge of the community's needs made her a natural leader, respected by both the young beneficiaries and the sponsors. Beatrice, Cecilia's sister, finally left for Scotland. The farewell at the airport was emotional. Richard and Michael made a point of accompanying Cecilia to say goodbye. The young woman, with tears in her eyes, thanked everyone, especially the little hero, as she affectionately called Michael. "I will honor every cent of this opportunity," she promised, hugging the boy. "And when I graduate, I want to work on your project, helping other young people like me." On the way back from the airport, Michael was unusually silent, looking out the car window with a thoughtful expression. "What is it, son?" Richard asked, concerned. "I'm thinking about Mom," the boy replied, with the sincerity only children possess. "I wish she was here to see Beatrice leave. I think she would understand what we're doing better." Richard nodded, feeling a tightness in his chest. Despite all the positive transformations in his life, Angela's absence left a void that no project, no discovery, could completely fill. "Do you think she'll come back one day?" Michael asked, turning to his father. "I don't know, son. I hope so." Richard smiled, trying to convey a confidence he didn't fully feel. "But in the meantime, we have each other. And we have our project." Michael smiled back, and the simple gesture lit up the entire car. "And we have Cece, and our friends from school who are helping, and the scholars. We have a lot of people now, right?" "Yes," Richard agreed, realizing the profound truth in his son's words. "We have a lot more people in our lives now." When they arrived home, a surprise awaited them. A car parked in the driveway, a female silhouette on the veranda. Angela had returned unannounced after nearly 2 months away. Angela was different, not just in her appearance. Her once rigorously straightened hair now showed natural curls. Her makeup was minimal, her clothes simpler, but mainly in her posture, less rigid, more vulnerable. "Mom!" Michael ran to hug her, while Richard remained a few steps away, unsure how to react. "My love." Angela knelt to embrace her son, with an intensity that surprised them both. "You've grown so much in this time." "It's only been 2 months, Mom," Michael laughed, still clinging to her. "They were the longest 2 months of my life," Angela murmured, kissing the top of the boy's head. When she finally stood up, Richard could see his wife's teary eyes, a vulnerability she rarely allowed herself to show. "Hi," he said simply, not knowing exactly how to proceed. "Hi," she replied, equally awkward. "Sorry I didn't call. It was a last-minute decision." "You don't need to call to come to your own home." "Angela." An awkward silence settled between them. filled only by Michael's excitement as he quickly recounted everything that had happened in her absence. "And we have a project, Mom. It's called Little Steps. We help people study like Stacey's sister. We have 15 scholars already, and more schools want to join. And Dad has a special office for the project, and—" "Michael," Richard interrupted gently, noticing Angela's confused expression. "Your mother just arrived. Let's give her some time to settle in, okay? You can tell her everything later." The boy nodded, still holding his mother's hand tightly, as if afraid she might leave again. "I can't wait to hear all about this project," Angela said, smiling at her son. "But first I need to take a shower and rest a bit." It was a long drive. While Michael helped carry Angela's bags to the bedroom, Richard made coffee in the kitchen, trying to organize his thoughts. He hadn't planned for this reunion, had no speech prepared, no strategy. He felt strangely vulnerable, stripped of the defenses he normally used. Later, with Michael already asleep after the day's excitement, Richard and Angela finally had a chance to talk alone, on the back veranda, a part of the house they had rarely used before. "How are you, really?" he asked, pouring a glass of wine for each of them. Angela looked at the dark liquid before answering. "Different. More aware, maybe. Scared for sure." "Scared? Of how lost I was, Richard," she sighed, gazing at the starry night. "My therapist helped me see patterns I've been repeating since childhood. The fear of abandonment, the unhealthy need for control, jealousy as a defense mechanism." Richard nodded, moved by her unusual sincerity. "I understand. I've also been reflecting a lot on my own patterns. Michael told me about the project, about Cecilia." There was caution in Angela's voice, but not the hostility of before. "It seems you've built something important while I was away." "It was Michael's idea, really. He just inspired us, me and Cecilia." Richard hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "I don't want you to think we were moving on as if you didn't matter, Angela. We always missed you." Silent tears began to stream down her face. "I don't know if I can do it, Richard. I don't know if I can accept Cecilia back into our lives after everything." "She's not living here, if that's what you're worried about," Richard clarified quickly. "She works at the foundation, coordinates the project, but our family dynamic is completely different now." "It's not just that." Angela wiped her tears, taking a deep breath to control herself. "It's what she represents to me, all my insecurities, my fears, the mirror of what I failed to be for you two." Angela's raw honesty surprised Richard. It was as if the haughty, controlling version of the wife he knew had been replaced by someone more real, more human. "You don't have to decide anything right now," he said gently. "Take all the time you need. Get to know the project, understand what we're doing. Then you can decide if you want to be a part of it, if you want me to step away, if you want us to rebuild our family in some way." Angela nodded, grateful for his understanding. "Thank you." In the days that followed, a strange routine was established in the Montgomery house. Angela gradually reintegrated into family life, taking Michael to school, preparing dinners, trying to find her place in this new dynamic. Richard remained respectfully distant, sleeping in the guest room, giving her the time and space he had promised. After a week, Angela finally expressed a desire to see the Little Steps project. Michael, excited, insisted on accompanying her on the visit to the office in Midtown South. The space was simple but organized and welcoming. On the walls were photos of the first 15 scholars, their stories briefly told next to each picture. On a whiteboard, the plan for the coming months, new participating schools, fundraising events, expansion goals. Cecilia was there, organizing documents when they arrived. Upon seeing Angela, she visibly paled, stopping what she was doing. "Mrs. Montgomery," she greeted with evident nervousness. "Welcome." Angela nodded formally, unable to say anything. Michael, sensing the tension, quickly took on the role of guide, showing his mother every detail of the project, enthusiastically explaining how the selection process for scholars worked, how they were mentored, and what results had already been achieved. "You've already helped 15 people in just 2 months," Angela asked, genuinely impressed. 16, actually, Michael corrected proudly. "Including Cece's sister. She's already studying in Scotland. We have pictures, want to see?" Without waiting for an answer, the boy ran to the bulletin board, where there was a recent photo of Beatrice in front of the University of Edinburgh, smiling, holding books. Angela looked at the image with an expression that was hard to decipher. "She looks happy," "She's living her dream," replied Cecilia, who had timidly approached. "Thanks to your son and your husband." A tense silence settled between the two women. Michael, sensing the situation, pulled his mother away to show her other aspects of the project, leaving Cecilia behind. On the way home, Angela remained silent, absorbing everything she had seen. Michael, in the back seat of the car, watched his mother with anticipation. "What did you think, Mom?" he finally asked, unable to contain his curiosity. Angela turned to look at him, a soft smile on her lips. "I think I'm proud of you, Michael. Of your heart." The words, simple but full of meaning, made the boy grin from ear to ear. "Are you going to join the project with us?" I don't know yet, son. I need to think." That night, after Michael had gone to sleep, Angela sought out Richard in his study. He was working on some project spreadsheets, but stopped immediately when he saw her at the door. "May I come in?" "Of course," he replied, pointing to the chair in front of him. "I was impressed by the project," Angela began, sitting down. "It's more structured, more serious than I imagined. Cecilia has the practical experience, I have the contacts and resources, and Michael has the vision." Richard smiled proudly. "We make a good team," Angela nodded thoughtfully. "I noticed." An uncomfortable silence settled between them until Angela finally gathered the courage to ask what was really bothering her. "You and Cecilia, while I was away—" "No," Richard interrupted firmly. "There was never anything between us, Angela. Not before, not during your absence. Our relationship is strictly professional." She looked at him, searching for signs of a lie, but found only sincerity in his eyes. "Thank you for clarifying. And what about us?" Richard asked after a moment. "Is there any possibility?" "I don't know, Richard," Angela sighed, running her hands through her hair. "A lot has changed." "I've changed." "You've changed. I don't know if we fit together anymore." "Maybe we don't have to fit together like before," he suggested, with unusual gentleness. "Maybe we can build something new, more authentic." The idea hung between them, full of possibilities and uncertainties. Angela finally smiled, a sad but hopeful smile. "Maybe." In the weeks that followed, Angela gradually integrated into the Little Steps project. Initially just as an observer, then offering help in specific areas. Her experience with social events proved invaluable in organizing fundraising dinners that significantly boosted their collections. The first direct contact with Cecilia was tense, formal. Both maintained a respectful distance, interacting only when absolutely necessary, always with Michael or Richard as intermediaries. It was during the preparation for a major event at Michael's school that the first real barrier fell. Angela, organizing the logistical details, was struggling to coordinate the required number of volunteers. "I can talk to the people from my community," Cecilia offered timidly. "Several young people would love to participate, to give something back for the opportunity they're receiving." The suggestion was sensible, practical. Angela hesitated for only a moment before nodding. "That would be very helpful. Thank you." The event, a cultural fair with artistic performances and the sale of products donated by partner companies, was a resounding success. They raised over $50,000, enough to expand the program to 30 scholars. During the event, Angela watched Cecilia interacting with the young volunteers from her community. The way she guided them with kindness, valued their contributions, and created an environment of mutual respect. It was a natural leadership, without imposition, based on example and affection. At the end of the night, exhausted but satisfied with the result, they found themselves organizing the last of the donations. "It was an incredible success," Cecilia commented as she sorted donated clothes by size. "It really was," Angela agreed, surprised at the ease of the conversation. "The young people from your community were essential. They're amazing. They just need opportunities." A comfortable silence settled between them, no longer filled with tension but with a mutual acceptance that was beginning to form. "Cecilia," Angela began hesitantly, I never properly apologized for the way I treated you." The nanny looked up, surprised by the initiative. "You don't have to, Mrs. Montgomery, I understand." "No, I do." Angela took a deep breath, facing her own demons. "I projected all my insecurities, all my fears onto you. I saw threats where there was only dedication. I was unfair, cruel. Silent tears began to stream down Cecilia's face. You were protecting your family. Any mother would have done the same. No, Angela shook her head. I was protecting my ego, my control. It wasn't about Michael or Richard. It was about me, about my fear of not being enough. Angela's brutal honesty created a space of vulnerability that they both cautiously occupied. We all have fears, Mrs. Montgomery, Cecilia said softly. I have so many myself. Fear of not being able to help my grandmother in West Virginia. Fear that Beatrice will face prejudice in Scotland. Fear of not being good enough at this job. You are more than good enough, Angela interrupted, with a sincerity that surprised them both. The project wouldn't exist without you. Michael wouldn't be who he is without your influence. The words, simple but deeply meaningful, broke down the final barrier between them. They didn't hug. There were no dramatic gestures of reconciliation, just a mutual acceptance, a silent acknowledgement that they could coexist, perhaps even collaborate, without hostility. The Little Steps project grew rapidly in the following months. What had started as a modest initiative to help young people from Cecilia's community gained unexpected dimensions. Businessmen from Richard's circle, impressed by his change in priorities, began to contribute. Other private schools adopted the model, creating their own chapters. In 6 months, they were serving 60 scholars. In a year, over 100, with a university acceptance rate that caught the attention of the press. A major newspaper report on the project was the turning point. Titled The Little Philanthropist, it told the story of how Michael, at 8 years old, had inspired the creation of one of the city's most successful educational inclusion programs. Invitations to speak began to pour in. Initially, Richard gave the talks, but soon Michael, with his natural eloquence and contagious enthusiasm, became the public face of the project. It was during one of these events, in a packed auditorium at Columbia University, that the Montgomery family's transformation was complete. Michael on stage simply told how it all began, with a boy hearing his nanny's cry, determined to help. No one should cry alone, he said, repeating the words he had spoken to Cecilia in that first moment when he handed her his savings. That's the principle of Little Steps. We're not alone in this world. We can help even when we're small. The audience moved, gave him a standing ovation. In the front row, Richard and Angela watched their son with identical expressions of pride. Without realizing it, their hands met, their fingers intertwining naturally. Cecilia, sitting a few chairs away with the program's first scholars, cried silently. After the talk, a reception brought together supporters and beneficiaries of the project. Beatrice, visiting from Scotland during her academic break, was there, enthusiastically talking about her progress. I'm at the top of my class, she said, radiant, and I've already secured a scholarship for an exchange program in France next semester. Angela, who was chatting with some sponsors, timidly approached the group where Beatrice was speaking. Congratulations, she said, extending her hand to the young woman. Your hard work is inspiring. Thank you, Mrs. Montgomery. Beatrice shook her hand with a genuine smile. But I couldn't have done it without your son's help. And your husband's. And your sister's, Angela added, looking at Cecilia, who was approaching with a tray of drinks. Without her, none of this would have happened. It was the first time Angela had publicly acknowledged Cecilia's role in the entire journey. The gesture, simple but full of meaning, did not go unnoticed by anyone present. That same night, back at the house in Belgravia, which now seemed warmer, less cold, Richard and Angela talked about the future, sitting on the veranda under the stars. I never imagined our son would teach us such a profound lesson, Angela commented, sipping herbal tea. He saw what we as adults couldn't see. The purity of a child's gaze, Richard agreed. No prejudices, no calculations, just genuine empathy. They were silent for a moment, absorbing the tranquility of the night. I love you, Richard, Angela said suddenly. Differently than before. More real, perhaps. Less dependent, less suffocating. He looked at her, surprised by the unexpected declaration. I love you too, Angela. I always have, even when we lost each other. It wasn't a fairy tale happy ending, they both knew. The marriage still had wounds to heal, patterns to rebuild, but there was an honesty between them that had never existed before. A willingness to see each other in their entirety, with flaws and virtues. A few days later, A large ceremony at Michael's school celebrated the one-year anniversary of the Little Steps project. On the auditorium stage, the boy, now 9, prepared to address an audience that included officials, business leaders, educators, and, most importantly, the program's beneficiaries. "When I heard Cece crying that night," he began, "with touching simplicity, I didn't know I was starting something so big. I just knew I wanted to help." In the audience, Richard and Angela listened, hand in hand. Cecilia, sitting with her family, her grandmother, who had come especially from West Virginia, Beatrice, visiting from Scotland, cousins and uncles, cried silently. "I learned that no one is too small to make a difference," Michael continued. "That good doesn't happen on its own. We have to start it." The applause was thunderous. At the end of the ceremony, Beatrice presented a surprise, a live video call with other international students who had been inspired by the project's story and were replicating the model in their own countries. It was more than Richard, Angela, or Cecilia could have ever imagined when it all began. Their small seed of empathy, planted by a child, had grown and spread far beyond the walls of the mansion in Belgravia. That night, back home, the Montgomery family gathered for a special dinner. Cecilia and Beatrice were invited, along with their grandmother. Around the table they talked, laughed and shared stories, no longer as employers and employee, but as partners on a transformative journey. As he watched the scene, Richard thought of the cameras that had once dominated that house, installed to watch, to control, to feed suspicions. Ironically, it was through them that he discovered his son's true nature, the treasure he had before him and couldn't see. Later, when everyone had left and Michael was asleep, Richard accessed the surveillance system one last time. Images from the past flashed across the screen. The boy counting coins in secret, writing goals in his little notebook, handing the envelope to the nanny. Moments that had changed the course of so many lives. With a click, he deleted the entire system. The cameras created to watch had served a greater purpose than imagined. They had shown the true emotional distance that separated them and, with it, the path to reconnection. The Montgomery house now could breathe. There were dinners with real conversations, mornings with genuine hugs, shared projects. Angela continued her therapy, discovering strengths in herself she never knew she had. Richard was learning to balance work and family, to listen more than he spoke, to value the present moment. Cecilia, now the executive director of the Little Steps Foundation, coordinated a growing team, maintaining the project's humanized essence. Michael, the catalyst for all this transformation, was growing up surrounded by examples of generosity and purpose. In a recent video call, Beatrice had shown them her new apartment in Edinburgh, which she shared with other international students. "I never imagined I would be here," she said, emotional. "You changed my life." The phrase echoed in Richard's mind as he gazed at the stars from the veranda, Angela asleep on his shoulder. "You changed ours," he murmured, thinking of Beatrice, of Cecilia, but mostly of his son. Because sometimes it takes a child to teach an adult how to be human. End of story. Dear listeners, we hope the Montgomery family's journey has touched your hearts, showing how small acts of kindness can transform not only individual lives but entire communities. Little Michael reminds us that genuine empathy knows no age or social boundaries, only the courage to act when we see someone in pain. To continue experiencing emotions like this, we have a special playlist with other inspiring stories that explore the complexity of family relationships. Find it by clicking here on the side. If this narrative resonated with you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave a like. Every day we bring you unique stories that connect us with what is most human in each of us. We look forward to seeing you in the comments to share your own experiences of transformation and new beginnings.